Hi, welcome to week 18 of MRA Watercolor. Last time we practiced softening edges, and we learned that in most watercolor paintings we're going to find both soft and hard edges. Today we'll start with a quick pencil sketch of a roadrunner and add color to it. Let's try to capture the roadrunner in a running position. We'll have reference photos to go by. When sketching something from real life, pay close attention to your reference. The goal of this part is to lightly draw the basic shapes of the roadrunner, not to focus too much on the details. Observe closely, yes, but don't spend lots of time on the beak or on many little feathers when our main goal is to put paint to this. Besides, we don't need to draw an exact representation. Cameras are great for that. Instead, we need to capture the expression or the gesture of this bird. What makes it recognizable as a roadrunner? The tail feathers, the long beak, the spiky feathers on its head, or all of the above? Now this took me 2 to 3 minutes to sketch. You should spend about that same amount of time so we can have enough time for painting. Before adding any color, I chose to add water to the bird. My water was a little tinted with some red because I had done a couple of these already, so that's why you can see the water. But I'm just laying down some water in areas that I know I want to have some wet on wet. And not every part of the bird is going to have water on it. I let it be a little splotchy just so that some areas could be a little more defined while other areas could blend. It really isn't too difficult to figure out where to add water. There's not really a wrong way to do this. Except if you covered up the eye. I guess you would probably not want to do that. The eye is an area where it can be a little tricky, so stay away from the eye. And I also stayed away from the legs. I wanted the legs to have a nice hard edge to them, so I did not add water there. I'm making some cool red here. It is a pretty pigmented puddle because my paper's already wet. I also, when I wet the area, I didn't let certain sections, I separated certain sections as I laid the water down, kind of like we did last week with the cylinders. We kept the inside as a separate wet section from the sides of the cylinders. Well, it's the same thing here. I kept the body of the bird a little separate from the tail. Now I'm just dropping color kind of randomly, and I have the time to do that because the bird is mostly wet. It did start to dry a little bit on me. Make sure whenever you add water to your bird that if you do the wet on wet at the beginning, that there is plenty of water on the bird. Not puddling, but plenty of water, because this paper happened to be very thirsty, and I didn't take that into account exactly enough, so it did start to dry on me before I was ready. Notice that I stayed away from the eye. Eyes can be a little tricky, so I'm saving that for later. Holding the brush upright gives you a chance to get more of a fine line out of the brush. You'll have all the round brushes, all the sizes available for you. When I started out, I had the largest brush, and as I went along, I did change to a smaller brush, especially around the eye. Now I'm dropping in some neutral gray. I made a tiny little strongly pigmented puddle. If you need to, you can take paint directly from the palette because you're putting wet paint into a wet area, so you can add a stronger pigmented color. Now look again at your reference photo and try to get an idea of where you want to add more details, but not too much detail, because again, this is just a quick exercise. But look at the areas that stand out to you. Some of the markings on these roadrunners around the eye are very interesting. I decided to do some spattering. This is a good time to do it because you're still perfecting the areas, to your liking, and you don't have to worry too much about spattering on the end result of your painting. So spattering along as you go just seems to work better in the end. Now here I'm carefully doing the eye. It can be tricky to do the eyes because if you lose the sparkle that's there in the eye, then it can take the character away from whatever you're painting. So be careful, but if you lose the reflection or the light that's shining out of the eye, you can always add it back in by using a white pen or scraping it even. And that reminds me, remember when we worked on the balancing rocks? At times we had to lift color out to create texture, or we had to scrape the paper to create texture. In this project, you might find that you need to do those things. So remember what you've learned and try to use those tricks. Here I just thought that it needed a little bit more modeling, a little bit more look of feathers, so I just started to just blot it on, and then I added a shadow inside it to soften that as well. That's it. You may find that you have time in class to do more than one. If you'd like to start without pencil sketching first, that would be a good practice too. Here is an example of where I added a background color, mostly because I had a little trouble with the beak area, softening edges there. But I found that it was really fun, so if you want to add a background color, you may do that as well. Have fun with this. Thank you so much for watching.